Okay, so welcome everybody. I'm glad that you were all able to join us. We've got a full house tonight and a full agenda. I'd like to introduce Pat Simmons. Of course, his reputation and experience and ability to deliver messages just goes without saying. He's awesome. We had a great session last time. So I'm looking forward to another very informative session this time. So Pat, thank you so much for agreeing to do this. And if you'd like to take it away, that would be good. Now, do you have anything that you would like to present on the screen, or shall we just keep it on my screen for now?
Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks again for having me. Yeah, if we need to get to something on my screen, I think we have the ability to do that, right? If
Okay.
Later on. So, but right now, that's perfectly fine, I think. Yeah. So, welcome everyone. Glad you could join tonight. Tonight's just a nice sized group, and kind of the point of tonight is to just be interactive, right? Any questions you have, any thoughts, concerns, if we can help out or get suggestions, if we need to kind of discuss through some things, that's great too. But kind of the idea tonight was more just, kind of really open, casual and open, and sometimes that type of forum and good discussion are in a lot of ways sometimes the best and most informative. So I did get a bunch of questions in the past few days that I think we can start with. And this is, some of the questions actually are very timely. I was just up in Saskatoon. We had a big junior spiel up there. And so I got a chance. We're running some different coaching rules and things and doing some pilots that way, but had a chance actually to coach for the weekend a junior girls team. Actually, we were in the U18, but there were 14 and 15-year-olds. And that was timely just because some of the questions are certainly related to U18, U15 and to do with strategy and how to approach it and whatnot. So I was lucky enough, I guess, to have that experience at the right time, right where this was happening. But so let's kind of jump into just some of the questions to start with. Feel free to interrupt, feel free to ask any questions along the way. Whether it be on your mic or typing in, that's all good. The more the better that way for sure. So
Pat,
I think you're breaking. Oh, sorry. You're breaking up a little bit, Pat.
Yeah, what I'm going to do is I am going to mute everyone else. And so if you have a question, please use the chat box. If you, I will keep an eye on the chat box and we'll pass your questions or comments along to Pat. But we will open up the mics a few times during the presentation just to allow you all a chance to talk. So I'm going to pass, I'm going to mute everyone, and then Pat, I'm going to pass the presenter role to you, and you accept, and then I think we will have a better connection. So hang on, hang tight just a minute, everybody. Okay, Pat, take it away. Oh, Pat, you're muted. You need to unmute. Okay, I think you're unmuted now, Pat.
Okay, we're ready to roll?
We are. I can hear you. Perfect.
Perfect. Good stuff. Okay, so yeah, like I was saying, 3 or 4 or 5 of the questions that I got were related to, U18, U15, kind of, how do you approach strategy with that age group? And so like I was saying, it was really timely that I had, I got to experience that with the team that we had this past weekend. And so that'll be the lead in kind of to the first few questions basically here. And one of the first questions was, in that age group, whether it be U18 or younger, basically, how do you approach strategy? What is a good strategy to play with when you're, in a lead, for instance, or have a big lead? What is a strategy when it's a close game? What do you do when you're down? Does it change? Does it not? And I think we all have our conventional, plans, an end plan or a game plan with, and then an end plan, and you kind of want to go from there. You've got to certainly take into account your team and their levels and kind of what shots are realistic for them and whatnot. But I think the answer to all three, when what do you do with a big lead? What do you do with in a close game, and when you're down points? I would argue that at that level, at that younger age level, a lot of it is similar. I think the game changed too much, and I know I'll just run through kind of some examples from the weekend, and kind of some of my insights. But I know there's times as a coach, I guess, when you've got that age of an athlete and they're just developing, and certainly in a lot of cases the hitting is a little weaker, and so certain shots just become more difficult than others, and so as a coach, you're sitting back there and thinking, well, this is probably what would happen if they were a competitive men's and ladies team that was on tour or at the slam that's on right now or what have you. But is that realistic for them to do? Is it realistic for them to peel out an end? Is it realistic to do this, to do that, right? So we got in a situation where, and I think, I know it worked really. It was really interesting to watch the weekend unfold with these young gals, and it ended up being a situation, regardless of the scoreboard, that we just tried to play to our team's strengths as many ends as we possibly could in every game. And so, I think it was neat to see, and I never really had that thought in mind before, but I think at those age groups, I think that's important. I think really getting a feel for kind of what your team's strengths are. The front end can make a lot of draws, or they throw their this turn a little better, or that turn a little better, or whatever. That's what we did. That's kind of how the weekend went or whatnot. And then we ended up having a lot of discussion about that. And I think, it was a situation where, so-and-so, our lead, was making this shot lots, and second was making this shot, and third was doing this, and Skip was doing this. And it ended up being kind of a, in a sense, a way of strategizing for those games. We ended up playing those games where, it was basically a thought in mind of trying to dictate the ends based on what our team's strengths were. And it was interesting, and I think, I certainly, mentally kind of made note of shots that, maybe we didn't play because, the chance of us making those shots were minimal, just at the stage of development that they were at. And I think it's important as coaches to make note of that and work on those, during practices and develop those, and obviously get better at those for sure. But it was neat to see them kind of go through a weekend like that and understand that they, almost begin to understand that they were, good at certain things, and had some really good discussions. It's a really good team discussion to have as well, because it's kind of almost the start of development of skipping skills as well, because as a skip, and they might as well start learning that at a young age. Your job is to, or one of your main jobs is to make your teammates better, right? And so part of that is, giving them, shots or ranges or opportunities to have something positive or good come out of their throws, out of their shots, right? So it was good. We had a good weekend that way. There was a lot of learning that took place. A lot of, I think, the start of a way of thinking as a skip, even to get to a point where you're starting to think in a matter of making teammates as good as you can, of giving them, shots with multiple options that are okay or that are good, and so on and so forth. So, anyways, yeah, I think certainly it wasn't a situation where, you were doing kind of the things from a strategic standpoint necessarily that you would see on TV from elite teams, and a lot of that was related to hitting or just getting on into that stage of the game and the consistency or ability to do some of that, right? Whether it be hits or run backs or peels or any of that. But yeah, no, it was interesting, I think, and to kind of answer that question, I think that the best strategy in all those scenarios was for us anyways, and food for thought for you guys as coaches as well, if you do have a team kind of in that age and stage, is to what their strength is, and that maybe doesn't change an awful lot with respect to the scoreboard then as well. And I know for us that it didn't, we kind of strove to have as many ends as possible that, we kind of played on our terms and what our strengths were basically. So just a different way, a different approach, a kind of a different way of thinking about it a little bit with respect to those younger ages as well. And, yes, there's things you can take away that they need to work on because you're, maybe shying away in some instances from certain shots at that time. But like I say, putting those on the back burner, certainly not ignoring those down the road as far as development goes, because that's important too. But I think also, helping build confidence of the players, of the team. It's fun. You make curling shots, right? And so, there's more enjoyment typically, and everyone feels better about themselves and so on and so forth. So that was kind of the experience, kind of one of the questions we had from our end, and I don't know how many of you are coaching kind of that age group, but it's interesting, and because it is different, and you've got to kind of, in some cases, you got to almost think outside the box a little bit with respect to the approach with them as well, for sure. All right, so I'm just going to run through, certainly there's a bunch of other questions, so I'll just kind of run through them and stop me if you want any clarification or anything, and we'll kind of go through just a bunch of questions that I did receive as well. So one of them was, what would be the situation where you would consider throwing rocks through? So assuming it's kind of the last end of the game, basically, and certainly with the 5 rock rule, that has changed a little bit as well. So my kind of rule of thumb typically was you almost at this juncture of the rule and how it looks, that you kind of want to be 4 up or more potentially to do that. Certainly if you're only 3 up, with the ability to throw 2 corner guards that can't necessarily be initially peeled right away, you are running a little bit of a risk, obviously, throwing rocks through, because 2 corner guards, you can kind of play the end out, and certainly there's a chance or an opportunity to score 3 points. So typically it's up 4 or more. We had that situation this weekend as well. We were actually, I think we were up 5 playing the last end, and I was they ended up throwing the first few through. I was even nervous at that stage though, and I'm sure you can all kind of attest to that if you've been in that situation, because you just never know what you're going to get or what might happen. But we did that, and it worked out just fine. So, but yeah, I think typically it's up 4 or more in that case. That should be safe to do that for sure. Another question was, what determines whether you should put up corner guards on one side of the sheet, while having one kind of tight and longer, or on both sides? And so that's a good question. You see that, kind of working both ways. Now a lot more than you used to. You see kind of the one side for sure, but you still see kind of both methods of doing that. In my opinion, there's a number of reasons why that may be the case. I think, the one typical, I think, that you think of when people are putting them up on the same side, so one longer and one tighter guard, I think is just to keep, one half of the sheet at least a little more open, right? So you're not, really potentially clogging things. If things don't go your way later on in the end, you still obviously want to try and score a point. So I think that's, one of the factors for sure. I think ice has a factor, or should have a factor as well. I don't know, how many of you have played on ice that's, maybe dished a little bit? So you kind of are drawing to the wings, and it'll curl to a point, but then, almost it stops curling because it's almost climbing the hill a little bit, right? It may not finish fully behind a wider corner guard. So in that case, like if you do have that, say on both sides, throwing a longer and a tighter guard on one side, you can maybe move those in a little bit further safely then, because you still do have, like I say, the other side free and clear. So you might be able to kind of get something buried without getting to the point where the rock's trying to travel uphill kind of along the edge, maybe edge of 8 foot or something like that. So I think that would be potentially another reason. If you have a lot of curl, like say you have it's the opposite. Say you have a ton of curl, right? And so a longer guard isn't necessarily too useful all of a sudden. You can, in that case, you might consider kind of going same side, just because you can throw the longer guard first and defend against teams chipping, a tighter guard, for instance, into the house, especially when you still need that tighter guard to actually be useful, like if there's a whole bunch of curl, for instance, as well. So that could be another instance. If you know your opposition, I think it's maybe dependent a little bit on who you're playing to. If you know your opposition is just going to completely load up the center on you as well, then you definitely want to, you don't want to be fully blocked off, obviously, on both sides. I think sometimes it's also, you'll see it because of maybe the first guard was missed a little bit. Maybe it was, maybe it's too tight and you're going to have trouble getting around it, or maybe it's really long and it's useless, and then, by default, you're going around that with a tighter one as well. So I think that is also the case at times. I also think too, can be, if you're thinking from a skipping standpoint, I think you might also go the same side too if you have a turn preference. So if your team has a turn preference, you can guard against the opposition, peeling the guard. If they maybe have picked up or know something there too, you can guard against them peeling off the corner guard that you really wanted to use, right? So you can ensure that if you kind of get to using those, that it's kind of with the turn you want, or maybe maybe the sheet curls more one side than the other, and you can then dictate that you'll at least get a chance to use that side that you want as well by throwing them on the same side. I think also, it might, another reason to do one or the other, I guess, is just what the opposition has done. So kind of playing what's in front of you a little bit as well, right? I can think of, I guess, one example of that. For instance, say you throw up your corner guard and, maybe the opposition has tried to throw a top 4-foot or something, but over curls and almost kind of takes away that corner guard by accident a little bit. So, that might be an instance where you throw it on the other side, right? Because, you're double guarding something that they've kind of already taken away a little bit. Wow. So I think also just, or maybe they go back 12 and whatnot, and you're not the least bit concerned yet about blocking off anything, and you might go to the opposite side versus the same side or what have you. So just even playing the rocks in front, I think, often we forget, we kind of come up with a plan or have a plan, but so too is it so important to react to what's in front of you, to react to, what you see, and just knowing the whys of being able to change on the fly. I think, partly comes with experience, but also comes with, good discussion on, from you as coaches leading on, why you might do certain things, why you might try certain things, and just, having that learning and that development in that instance, because I think, often, and I think this is, you see it a lot in younger teams, once things just slightly go astray from maybe the end plan in place, how good are they at reacting to that, or changing what they may do based on what's in front of you. So that would be another example or reason to think one way versus the other as well there. So I think that's a lot of reasons. You might do one or the other. So I think those are just some thoughts anyways on, why you might do one, why you might do the other with respect to the corner guards. And you'll see that a lot. You'll see that a lot even, on TV this week from the Slam and all sorts of teams doing different things and so on and so forth for sure. So there was a question kind of in relation to that. There was a question about corner guards and, just having trouble getting to using them, that players seems to be drawn to the center and how do you get out of that funk? How do you've thrown it, now how are you going to use it, right? And that can be an issue, can be a problem, and again, I think it depends on the age of your team, maybe the stage of development that they're at, how efficient they are at accepting a little risk for the possible reward that's after that. How good are they at, making a couple run backs or a run back and a double or something to turn the tide so that they can, go on to the offensive, right? So obviously you can always throw a corner and then go around it right away. And then you could argue that you're using it right away, which is always a good thing. Usually there's a shot or two to be made to, get that to a situation where that's actually, possibly a counter for you, right? But you always have the option to do that immediately versus throw another card for sure. You always have also the option to not throw the corner on your first one. Maybe it's a situation where you're hitting. The opposition goes in the house and you hit and roll to the corner and then throw a corner guard, right? And a way to avoid a lot of clutter in that sense too as well. So, just because the rule's in place doesn't mean that you have to, in a non-advantageous way, use it to get yourself in trouble. I think it's important and integral for you guys to have plans for your respective teams to as best as possible avoid that, right? And that all goes back to kind of what shots, what are the strengths of our team, what shots are they capable of, and the balance between, we've got to get better at this shot, so let's develop it versus, we're going to do this for now, but we are going to work on that, and so on and so forth, right? So there's always that kind of balancing act with abilities and probabilities of kind of the shots that you put in front of you basically as well. So, all right. So, questions about anything so far?
We've had one question, and I believe you answered it, Pat. If you have hammer, could you hit and roll the top 4-foot rock and place a corner on the 4th rock? But I think you talked about that.
For sure, yeah, for sure. I mean, that's a way that you can kind of dictate a little less messy end in some cases, right? For sure you can, because that corner still can't be hit that you throw, right? And now instead of looking at a top 4 and a tight guard, you've reduced one of those for the time being, anyways, immediately. So exactly. I mean, there's all sorts of little things. You can also, in a more conservative manner, you can also, and again, it depends on what's in front of you, right? But you can certainly develop, plans or strategies on getting to, depending on where the first rock of the end is. Maybe the team throws a long center guard, right? And I know as a player, I used to hate when we didn't mean to, but ended up throwing a long center guard, because so often, it'd be costly, right? Because the other team, the team with hammer would go top 8 around it, and what do you do at that stage, right? I mean, you could freeze to it, but now you're half in the 12th, but with your freeze, and then the other team kind of draws to the open side back 8, and now what do you do, right? I mean, it's just an uncomfortable. So again, it's kind of teaching the kids or adults or teams to be able to react, to kind of know the whys and react to what's in front of you, and how to take advantage of that, to the best of your team's ability, again, kind of, with respect to their strengths and maybe weaknesses in mind, as far as, we've got to keep it a little simpler because we're not capable of this shot or this shot as consistently as we like yet. We're getting better at it, but we're not quite there yet. So that ability to react is important, and that's something that I think, in some degrees can be a little bit of a lost art, and I think that's going to be important, to talk to the teams about, talk to the skips about, and part of kind of just good skip development, I guess, if you will, right? So yeah, absolutely, good point and good question for sure. So had another one. So situations where you draw open side, or that might be a good option. And so I think I just named one there in our last example of potentially putting pressure on a team and maybe scoring 2 when you haven't even thrown a center guard. Maybe they've made a mistake with a long guard, and you kind of put one top 8 around it, and in some degrees, they've got to kind of do something with that. Maybe they freeze to it or whatever, and you can kind of work the open side that way, and then it just becomes almost a hitting contest potentially. Might get your 2 that way as well. There's always danger of them coming around everything, but that's never without huge risk either for the team without last rock too. So you may do that. You may go to the open side, say if it's it's a simple end, or you want to keep a blank option in play. You may think about that, obviously. If it's a really tight center guard, you might do that. Again, to avoid a huge amount of clutter, if that's a good thing for you, that might be a consideration. Also might be a matchup situation, right? So if you're playing a bit of a matchup or hoping to waste a stone or 2 on purpose of the opposition rocks, you may also do that. That can be an okay play as well, just depending on kind of that side of things as well. So and just a bit of a different way of thinking of it, basically, too. So those are situations that you would, in some degree, that you would see that being done. had one situation where you would try to tick a corner guard into the house. So, yeah, that's a really good question. I think it depends. For me, it would depend again on kind of level that you're coaching. If it's, if it was the team that I had this past weekend that are, 14 and 15-year-olds, I don't think we would ever do that. And the reason for that is just because you're in making that, you're pretty close to a bit of a disaster in a sense, right? Where you might tap them buried on the nose, for instance, or something, right? So I don't think I tried to think through the weekend if there would ever be a time that we would have even considered that, and I think the answer probably is no. As teams grow and develop and become really confident at a whole number of different things, then I got thinking, and I think you might do it again in kind of a last end scenario, maybe not even a last end scenario. In a scenario where you're up 4 or more, you might do that, such that you can hit it, or you're forcing them to guard it on your terms after the fact. You might even do it, you might even consider that up 3 playing the last end, and you've maybe you've got a couple in the house already, and it's or you've got one in the house, one good one in the house already, and you're wanting just access to be able to hit that before you can actually start peeling for real, for instance. So you may consider that at that point, but way up, I guess you could have a good go of that. You might even get lucky and kind of push it into that back corner. That obviously that would be the perfect shot, right? You've almost made a peel when you're not supposed to be peeling, kind of thing. So I think you see that a little bit more in mixed doubles, like during the power play, potentially, like as a defense against the power play, maybe when you're up, kind of thing. And maybe that's where that's kind of come into play a little bit as well. But those are kind of the times I could think that you might consider that, I guess.
We got a couple of questions on the chat.
Sure.
Would you advocate for practicing an assortment of skills to defend in late ends with the 5-rock rule, such as peels, ticks, blocks, runbacks, to be prepared for all eventualities? Or would you focus on one style to maximize the strength of your team?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. That's kind of what I was saying, the balancing act, right? I think what you'll see watching is there might be instances, especially with the younger teams, there might be instances where you've got these strengths, right? And so you kind of play them. I mean, you're still trying to develop and breed confidence and have fun and win the game and so on and so forth at the time. But I think that's exactly right. That's where it's important to take note of, maybe some of the things, maybe we didn't play this shot, or maybe we didn't play this way just because we're not as consistent or maybe quite capable enough to do that yet. So I think it's hugely important to develop and keep working on those. I think those would be the things. I mean, when you're watching, that's one of the ways that you can kind of build practices in a sense. So almost, I guess, in saying that you don't just keep working on the stuff you're good at already. You want these athletes to be well-rounded, and certainly they're going to need all the tools in the toolbox later on. If they're wanting to play, really competitive men's or ladies, anyways, right? So setting them up for that success, I think, is our onus, and it's very important for sure. So absolutely, I would fully advocate, having practices where, you're starting to work on other things for sure, and it might be the plan, but also working on, how you make that plan come to fruition. Maybe it's working on throwing peel weight. Maybe it's working on, what's the right weight for playing a tick shot, and practicing that. It's, and I get asked all the time, what, about tick shots, and, when should we use them and how do we use them and whatnot. And one of the big things is, I mean, that's not something you can just, all of a sudden start. I mean, you've got to get good at it and practice, because it's typically a shot that if you miss it, it's detrimental. You've almost wasted your rock, right? So, and same would be true for other types of shots as well, in a sense, right? So, those are good avenues with which to practice on. And practices, I mean, it's good to, I mean, it's obviously good to work on stuff that and hone skills that are already there and keep developing those, but certainly to pay particular attention to things that need improving for sure is vitally important. Absolutely.
Would you recommend 2 corner guards, one on each side for a U15 team?
Yeah, I think not very often at all, to be honest. So again, just thinking back to this weekend, and I mean, I know a small sample size because it's not a situation where I'll be coaching that team through their entirety. Although I will be, I'll get to watch a few more events, obviously, and learn a little bit more about that game as well. But probably, probably not. Again, because really put it that making a run back or making a peel or a double peel or something like that, it's going to be difficult, right? So
you'd recommend putting the corner guards on one side so that they keep their options open for the other side.
Yeah, you know what? Maybe, but I would argue that there's going to be a lot of times you don't even get to the second corner guard. Like, you might not even do that anyway. And again, it's going to depend on who you're playing, and it's going to depend on what they get. I think a big part of it as well, right? But I would argue that there's going to be a lot of instances where you're just not even going to get to that point, probably. If they throw one back 12 and then they're not ideally set up potentially before that, then then you could do either for sure, and really potentially no right or wrong. I think for the reasons we discussed on the reasons why you do one versus the other still would come into play in that case, likely. But I think that's going to be a lot more rare at that age, that they'll even need to, in a sense. I mean, there's different teams at that age will have different skill levels as well, for sure. But I know what I watched through the weekend here, and that was U18, and that didn't happen. I don't know that I remember seeing that once in all the games that we played where a team had that opportunity. So will it happen? Sure, it may very well happen. Is there a right or wrong? Not necessarily. I think a lot of it comes down to execution, and if you're executing, then it probably doesn't matter either way, in a sense. Those things that we talked about are just little key points as to why you might pick one over the other, basically.
Perfect.
All right, good stuff. Okay, so all right. Let's see here. I'll just see if I can find another question. Okay. So one of them was talking about POA. And I guess this kind of is in line with this age as well, right? And usually, at the younger ages, I mean, one of the struggles can be hitting and certainly peel weight or throwing big weight, and so how do you go about getting better at that? And then it's a good question. For me, I think there's an off-ice component of that and an on-ice component of that. Obviously, I think off-ice, it's of the younger kids that I've seen that have that ability, they're strong. Like, they've got good leg strength. They're already pretty strong that way. So not advocating necessarily being a bodybuilder at 13 years old, but you definitely, leg strength is a situation that helps. There's no doubt about it. I mean, the stronger and more stable that you can kick out of the hack, the typically the harder you'll be able to throw, right? So, I think there's, certainly some exercise, some training off ice that can help that and kind of start them on the right track going forward with respect to that, with respect to balance, even balance specific stuff that can be done with that, core strengthening obviously, and those types of things for sure. On ice, it's just practice. It's teaching them about timing. I think teaching them, a lot of kids think that to throw hard, everything's got to be, you got to move quickly right from the get-go. So you're right from the end of setup, kind of basically until you start, sliding forward, that everything has to be, at a rocket speed, which I personally disagree with, right? So certainly you want to kick out hard, but I think, the point in leading out to your kick out, I think needs to be even more controlled, even more deliberate in a sense. Certainly you can, leg drive is a factor. You can, pull back or have a deeper park, so to speak. You can certainly add weight in your slide as well through extension or even kind of almost like a trunk extension as well, or an arm extension too, right? But so little factors in adding weight, obviously, but probably starts with just gaining a little bit of confidence in kicking out hard, and so probably starts with broom out in front without even a rock, and going through those steps, firing out and just feeling confident that there's that balance there, and then obviously graduating to a rock, and then graduating to actually throwing the rock, and upping the weight as is comfortable. And I think for young kids, occasionally during practice, I think you want to push those limits and kind of challenge them a little bit, but it also doesn't have to be completely always certainly out of their comfort zone, because you want them to kind of be building confidence as they're doing that, yet then challenge them and then build the confidence at that stage, and so on and so forth. So, and then that goes all the way to eventually, I know kind of, in the midst or the best part of my playing career, I would set up rocks on purpose along the back line and basically pretend that those were halfway guards that I had to try and run back. So I was actually, trying to, with PO8, nose hit a rock on the back line, as if it was a guard that I was trying to run back. So, and the reason I did that is because it just made it more difficult than what I was going to see in a game situation, right? So just, practicing that way. I think the sky's the limit with respect to what you decide to do practice-wise or drills-wise, or, specifically that way. And I think sometimes we get caught up in, Googling or just, seeing what drills are already, there or available or whatnot, and just kind of going with those, when really you can kind of make it up or do whatever you want. I mean, there's all kinds of neat things that you can do with respect to that, or challenging your athletes and whatnot. But every once in a while, giving them something that's a little tougher than what they're actually going to see in the game, is a good thing. You don't want to necessarily maybe do that again always, just from a confidence standpoint, but stretching their limits a little bit and leaving that comfort zone a little bit never is a bad thing on occasion as well. So, all right. So I had one question, just kind of this one about corner guards too, that, if you do play both sides with your corner guards, is it better than to go wider, so you're, maybe less likely to block a draw path later on if need be and kind of thing. And, I think that's a reason to do that. The question was, well, we just never, with our young team, we just never are able to get to those. Right? We never can execute or make the shot to kind of get to those or have trouble kind of making those work. So would we be better off kind of throwing like a corner guard or a tight corner guard closer to their center, or maybe, on the 4-foot line or thereabouts instead? Yeah, again, I think that depends on your level. That kind of, for me, that's kind of like an old skins game move where if there's a center guard, I know we used to oftentimes throw one, short, but kind of beside, maybe a little tighter than it, and almost, in a sense, almost kind of start owning that side of the sheet, basically, right? And in skins, you don't want to kind of get to the button too quick. You've got to kind of build up towards that, basically. So, I know that worked good. That was always a good kind of way to approach it, knowing that play was going to be in the middle and there's going to be a whole bunch of rocks in play anyway. But I would also argue, though, that that's, again, totally dependent on abilities, right? Because if you're doing that, chances are you're going to need to make some sort of a run back or a couple really, high quality shots, I guess, to kind of proceed or make that successful as well. So, that one to me is, again, ability dependent and what you kind of have from a team standpoint and what you're capable of at that stage, for sure.
We have a couple of questions here, Pat.
Sure.
Can you suggest a drill to maximize the 5 rock rule strategy for U18 curlers?
Yeah, well, you know what? That's, a specific drill. I think it depends on. For me, that would depend on what you're working on or how you want to approach it. There might be all kinds. Is there one specific drill? I guess the answer to that would be just playing out scenarios, right? Play out scenarios. Maybe I know when we used to do scenarios, we would oftentimes, when we had a coach, we would have them throw from the far hog line and kind of make shots that way, and we would actually just play against them, basically, and start with a certain scenario, start with a certain score during a certain end, and have them work through that. And the nice thing about that is you as a coach can see everything. You can hear the communication. You can see their thought process in front of you. And you can also stop and discuss too, right? So those types of things, when you're talking about in general, when you're talking about strategy in general and whatnot, I think, scenario type work like that's invaluable. And that's, playing an end or two like that, in some practices, I think, is just a great thing to do. You probably should do that irregardless. And because you get so much the whole picture of that. And there's going to be other times you're working on something specifically, maybe from there, then, you realize, okay, well, in this scenario, this is kind of what we want to do, but we're not good enough at doing it. Maybe we're not good enough at making this tick shot, or maybe we're not good enough at, bumping this rock back, or maybe we're not good at throwing the 2 corner guards on the same side, if that's what we're trying to do. So then you can, get a little more specific as well. And so you can kind of work both ways. You can kind of do that and then, backtrack to get more efficient if there's something that's kind of missing, or obviously, a lot of the other drills, whether it be technical, whether it be, weight control, things of that nature, are gonna help with, your whole game as well, right? So, but when it comes to strategy, I don't think there's anything better than kind of running through scenarios and then discussing and, ensuring that you as coaches are kind of, as best you can, giving the whys behind, reasoning or suggestions, and making sure that the players and whatnot are also becoming confident in understanding those whys as well, that you're not just, suggesting something, but they're starting to learn kind of why and understand, because that down the road, that leads to their ability to react to what's in front of them better, as a team, as a skip, and what have you, for sure.
And it goes back to your earlier point as well, Pat, about knowing what they're good at and knowing what they're not good at, and do they keep playing the shots that are not strengths, and then through charting, recognizing that, and then that becomes your focus as well. Set up those scenarios where they've given up multiple points or whatever, and exactly talk about what worked and what doesn't work.
For sure, and absolutely, and you do want to get better. Like, you do have to, like I said, you do have to get better, and you want them to become well-rounded. So you don't ignore, what aren't your strengths. I think that would be setting up for failure later on, right? But I will tell you one thing: the game will never change, no matter how well-rounded or how confident they are at all aspects of the game. It's still going to be, at some level, at some point, the game within the game, and it's the importance of figuring out, what are your strengths, and knowing what are your strengths, what are your opponent's strengths and weaknesses, and coming up with some sort of a little plan, a matchup plan or a game plan to deal with that is huge. I mean, that's massively important, and I would argue that some of the top teams are so close now in their abilities that the ones that are better at that are the ones that have success. I think that's how important it is. And so, I think, and it does, it kind of starts with you guys, and it starts with, your young teams kind of understanding that and having that discussion. So it's not bad to play to your strengths, because that's something that they're going to have to figure out, and that's something they're going to want to do forever. But it is bad not to get better at your weaknesses. So I think that's where, there's that fine line, and when you get better at them, or when you are better at them, and sometimes you're going to play those shots in those games. It's not like you can always kind of, if you're struggling with hitting, it's not that you're never going to hit, because you'll have to, right? So, but I think certainly, the type of game to play to your strengths is always going to be a skill that will be necessary, for sure.
Another question, and this brings in your professional training. As a chiropractor, are there any curling drills that should be limited during a practice for U18 athletes? Is there anything that could cause them long-term harm?
That's a good question. I don't know necessarily, unless you're doing something absolutely off the charts, which we're hoping not, right? But I think, a lot of the mainstream ones, as long as it's curling related, as we know it, as far as drills are concerned, are okay. Curling, though, I'll tell you though, curling is it's a very one-sided sport, if you will. It's a very kind of asymmetric sport, whether it be sweeping. Certainly some sweepers are, becoming better kind of both sides, or a little more ambidextrous. Some aren't. Obviously, it's hard to do. The slide, though, is very one-sided, as you know. I mean, there's muscles lengthening on one hand and tightening on the other, and that just develops that way. So from that standpoint, I think it's really important to, do the stretching, do the training, if you will, beforehand to a certain degree. And again, how much at that age is kind of up to you, but there needs to be kind of a plan in place, going forward, because certainly later on in careers, it's really important to almost have a reset plan, if you will, to start the season where you're back kind of balanced and doing okay from a musculoskeletal standpoint for sure, just because it is such an asymmetric sport, so much pressure in some degrees on some joints in some areas, and like I say, loading in some degrees, and lengthening and stretching in others, and so on. So it's a good idea to have that discussion with them and to be smart about that. And I would say also be smart about that at an early age so that they get into good habits so that they can play for a long time. Because it can be a hard sport on your body just because of that. There's a lot of load, a lot of pressure, and a lot of asymmetry, which, the more balanced we are from a musculoskeletal body standpoint, the better, basically. And so, that's hugely important. And that's something that, without getting any further into it, that's something that would be a good discussion point with, an exercise physiologist, your chiropractor, your massage therapist. I mean, there's, physiotherapists, there's a whole host of people that can help you there as well. So, can basically, give you what you need in that sense to rectify accordingly.
Curling Canada has some excellent resources as well that, if you're working with a physiotherapist or a chiropractor or a professional that maybe doesn't have the in-depth knowledge of what curling does, Curling Canada has some great resources that can be downloaded and taken to your exercise specialist and shared with them so that they keep you pointed in the right direction.
Yeah, you bet. Yeah, you betcha. All right. We good to go?
Yeah, I think so.
All
you
right.
got some more questions there?
You bet. Yeah. So had a sweeping question, just about basically directional sweeping, and or what's kind of happening now. Is there any point in teaching kind of the kids directional sweeping as it were, basically, or not? So I guess a lot of kind of my information that I get and try and spread. We've been very lucky actually to have out in Saskatchewan here to have Glenn Pauly come out. He's got family that lives close by, so we've been very lucky to have him come out and kind of spread some of his insights. And of course, he's being from Ontario there, working with some university teams and whatnot himself. He's also been heavily involved in a lot of the brush sitting, if you will, and leading edge, I guess, research in as much as we kind of know about it, and so on and so forth. So so to my understanding is that the few years previous, obviously, to the new brush heads, obviously we were literally scratching the ice, and now it appears that just isn't happening anymore based on studies. So directional kind of sweeping as it was before isn't, in my opinion, then I guess, due to kind of the knowledge that's been passed on in that sense, isn't effective anymore. So I guess to answer the question is, are we teaching them kind of what we had been seeing on TV, in the sense where you're, to make a rock curl, you're kind of sweeping with the turn, but almost past the running surface, kind of, in the direction that the rock is trying to curl, and what we kind of had seen for a few years there when the rocks were dancing like crazy with how we were sweeping, basically, right? So that I would say is a definite no now as far as teaching them in that sense, just because that's not happening anymore. There's a lot of depth with respect to that. I don't know, Andrew, have you guys had Glenn on, or are you going to have Glenn on?
Actually, it's funny you should say he was on Monday.
Perfect. Okay, perfect. So, there's a lot of depth into that, and there's a lot. I mean, he has a wealth of knowledge with respect to that. and kind of his opinions of how you should be sweeping now and what you should be doing and so on and so forth, which based on what I've seen, I completely agree with. Yeah, it's just different now. And what you'll see on TV, what you still see on TV is still, might be this year, and we'll see kind of as we go. But from what I've seen so far, just in play thus far, even from the elite adult teams, is really 50-50. You're still kind of all over the map with how teams are sweeping. So yeah, I'll just leave it at that. If you have any questions specific to that, I guess let me know. There's a lot of depth into that, though, that gets to be a little hard to explain, I guess, without kind of some slides specific to show that, basically. But we can talk a little bit more about that if you want or need, for sure.
Glenn's session will be available in the archived webinars for anybody that wasn't on the session on Monday night. You can register and watch it at your leisure. So you haven't missed it if you still want to see it.
There you go. I just gave you a plug. That's perfect.
Yeah.
And then along that line, the thoughts of using one sweeper or strategies behind how you should be sweeping. How do you manage your sweeping? How do you manage kind of with respect to what weight's being thrown, how effective they are, the energy systems involved. Are you wasting energy by doing something a certain way and whatnot? And I guess, the nuts and bolts of that, again, and Glenn will have certainly touched way more on this, but, certainly two sweepers are better than one. The second sweeper can help, but I think it also probably depends on the weight that's thrown, because at the end of the day, pressure being most important and speed of your broom to change the temperature of the ice is when you're having an effect. So the faster the rock is moving, the less time your broom is in the same spot to have that effect on the ice. So, certainly I would argue that when you get much above, say, a board weight, I guess, or if you're a kind of a weight timer, maybe that's, I don't know if that's about 11 seconds maybe, but when you get above that, I think you could really argue how effective the far sweeper is in those cases. And, are you wasting your energy with that or not, right? So, and then when you have less weight than that, I think you definitely want to have some sort of a strategy in place for, what are you going to do? How are you going to manage a draw shot to get the best out of both sweepers, to get the maximum energy out of both sweepers? Because you do only have kind of, well, and as Glenn would have said too, you have about 6 to 8 seconds of your absolute max from a sweeper, and then it starts to go downhill a bit from there. So, but can also be effective, putting a lot of pressure down. Your technique is hugely important, and even if it's just like a hard pressure clean, are you is one sweeper able to be still quite effective, and then, can hit a rock later on when it's starting to, get past its break point and slow down, when you're even more effective as sweepers, right? Because you definitely want to, at least have one person fully ready to go when you're most effective with a rock, which is kind of in its last, half or third of its travel. Again, just because it's traveling slower, so you're having more effect on the ice, right? So lots to think about. I think, though, smart coaches and smart teams will have that discussion, learn as much about it as you can, have that discussion with your teams on how you actually want to approach those instances of sweeping, and have a plan. Have a plan for draws, have a plan for hits. What's your cutoff weight for hit where, you might only go with one if that's what you choose to do, right? So I think that's going to be a big part of the game for sure, as well as, where exactly the position of the start of your push stroke is with respect to the running surface to to, maximize distance or to try and keep the rocks straight, or, maybe try and promote a little bit of curl, even though we know that we're not scratching the ice necessarily anymore, right? So all important points, I think, for sure. So yeah, I would definitely say, learn as much about that as you can. And if you didn't kind of tune in on Monday with Glenn's, it might be worth checking that out either now or down the road for sure. Or like I say, getting in touch, and I can help you out with any further questions, whether it be on here right now or after the fact tonight as well. All right. Rotation. Had a couple more questions here. Had a question about rotations and what's, how many rotations? What should we be teaching on TV? The comment was that we're seeing, more rotations. So, instead of the 3, is it, should we be teaching 4 or 5 rotations basically? So yeah, good question too. My opinion is, you certainly need, you definitely need rotation. Obviously, you need a good positive rotation, as ice everywhere, I think, hopefully is getting better, whereby there's a little more curl. I know there are a lot more even clubs that, will texture the rocks a little bit to even further promote a little more curl and what have you too. There's a lot more of that happening than there used to be, I think, everywhere. So in that happening, rotation becomes, important, obviously. Always has been, but even more so for sure. On TV, I think you just have to be careful about what you watch on TV, because I know certainly, at slam events and different events, sometimes you'll see a lot of rotations, or maybe more rotations than even the specific teams would typically throw, just out of necessity. So a lot of times things are extremely aggressive in some of those events. And so just be careful of that. Know that might not even be the norm, and they're just adjusting or adapting to the situation, I guess, that lay in front. I think there is a sweet spot for rotations. I think, I think if you get into a situation where you're throwing an incredibly high number of rotations, in my opinion, I think there's maybe you're probably losing a little bit of feel, I guess, would be the trade-off there. And then again, I don't have any research to back that up, but I'm just thinking that, first of all, to impart that much rotation on a rock, I think you're probably losing a little bit of the length of the ice feel, or horizontal feel, if you will, with respect to, a draw or draw weight, if that's what you're throwing. And it's also going to travel further too. So, you have to, there's a little more fine tuning that way as well. If you sit in a hack and you spin it as hard as you can and then kind of set it going forward, it's hard to know. You don't really have any idea where that thing is going to go to, right? So, to a lesser degree, it's the same. So I think there is a fine line there. What it is, I don't know, but at the same point in time, no rotation obviously is important. And on aggressive ice with aggressive rocks that, are fairly sharp in a sense and designed for a lot of curl, obviously when you get much less than, 2.5 or 3 rotations, you may start to even lose rocks a little bit, right? Or have difficulty controlling them as well. So as I know, I've found out many ways the hard way. So yeah, definitely important what that number is, or what the exact number is. I think, maybe a little, again, person dependent, or certainly conditions dependent. And then, like I say, just a little word of caution for what you see on TV, because that isn't always exactly there. Those players are really good at adapting, and it's not a big deal for them because they've, kind of mastered all of that. So So you will see that obviously from time to time, and sometimes it's just out of pure necessity to have to do that as well.
So having that in your arsenal is a good thing too, but maybe it's not a top priority for a younger team.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's lots of little aspects of the game. I think that becomes an easier tool to add once you've gotten good at one thing in particular, right? Mm-hmm. Once you've mastered kind of, what you want them to be doing or what they want or need to be doing in a sense. And then after that, absolutely, then it can be, making little adjustments in that case and feeling comfortable to do so is great. Absolutely. And that will definitely be handy down the road for those young players kind of developing for sure.
Pat, do you think we should maybe open up the mic and see if there are any questions now?
Can do.
All right.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. We're going to So you're all unmuted now. Does anybody has Pat's information sparked anything in your mind?
Yeah, Pat, I had another question on that release, like how Swedish teams release with the back of the handle and the rock is at a 12 o'clock position, and they're actually using their back of the handle to impart the turn. What's your feeling of teaching our juniors that? Because the Swedish teams seem to be really good at it.
Yeah, you know what I think. So the key to delivery and release is repeatability and consistency, right? So being able to repeat and do the same thing over and over and over again. How you do that? If you can do that, then I would argue that it probably doesn't matter what you do. If you can do that over and over again, that's really what's important. I mean, that's if you think about it, if you can do the same thing over and repeat that over and over and over again, at an extremely high consistent level, then you're good to go. You could be underhanded and do whatever with the rock, right? But so that's one thing I would make on that. I think if you work hard enough to master anything, you're going to be good at it. And they obviously have worked hard at that and have mastered it, and they're good at it, just like Brad Gushu is at the absolute, for lack of a better Curling Canada release, delivery, etc. Right? Just I guess in general with respect to that, I think there's trade-offs. I kind of talked a little bit about that, and possibly having a straight handle. I think you could maybe argue, put your wrist in a strong kind of neutral position to start your line off in a good way. Now, that doesn't mean you can't do that with the classic 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock and release as well. Those trade off the other way, though, I think, if you watch them, they have no choice when they start it there. They have no choice but to be really positive, if you will, coming off the back and being positive with it, right? So that's where the extension comes into play with them. That's where they kind of have to throw that way, just because if you don't, you're anatomically in a situation where you're going to help them, basically. So it's right. You have to start teaching it. My opinion is you can get good at anything, and it's just a matter of being able to consistently do that as an athlete. And if someone was really good at that, if I came across someone that was, say already really good at that, would I try and change them if they could do that over and over again? Probably not. I don't know if that answers the question fully, but that's kind of, I think where my opinion would land on that probably.
Perfect. Thank you. Anybody else? Before, I think we will take one or two more questions if there are any, and then we'll mute everybody again because I think it does impact the sound quality. So does anybody else want to ask anything before I mute everyone? Okay. Pat, do you still have a few questions on your list?
I can just have a check here. I think so. So yeah, had a question just about, you know, having a blank plan. So having a plan if you've got a young team again, maybe a U18 team or a younger team. You know, oftentimes, you know, a good example, and it was stated in the question, you know, kind of, you know, if you're playing an 8-end game, a 7th end, you know, maybe you're tied up and obviously you'd love to get a blank. Is it worth it to have a blank plan? Is it worth it to have a blank plan when you're dealing with a young athlete or, you know, a young team? So that's a really good question. First of all, you know, if the likelihood is that, you know, that even if there's one rock in play, if it's, you know, really a coin flip whether the blank's going to be made or not at their stage of development anyways, you know, maybe it's not as worth it. Maybe you're better at to just kind of, you know, try and get your couple points, obviously. You know, but I also think there's value or merit potentially, you know, at times there's value or merit into, you know, safely trying for 2, but if, you know, keeping a blank option open per se, that might be why we, you know, maybe we play a few hits in an end like that. You know, maybe it turns into a hit and roll game where you still have a blank option available basically, versus, you know, throwing all guns to the wind and, you know, seeing what happens on the other end of that basically as well. Right. So yeah, I think, you know, yes, it may be, or yes, it can be. Yes, there's going to be ends that you want to play a little more cautiously or safe. And, you know, a blank is a very viable or good option, or, you know, might be, if not the best option, might be a close second or whatnot as well. But again, also going back to our earlier discussion, it's also, you know, kind of dependent on your team, dependent on, you know, their strengths and whatnot. And what's the worst? I know from experience, what's the very worst is when you know, really try hard to blank it and, you know, end up kind of getting forced and, you know, then wonder after the end, well, why, you know, we could have got forced by trying for 2 or 3, you know, why didn't we try for 2 or 3, right? So playing that balancing act as well, you know, I think is pretty important. The other thing, I mean, when they get more developed and, you know, teams are, you know, just more capable and playing with more confidence. A team that doesn't want to end blanked will, you know, it becomes a hard situation to have a blank end, you know, if your opposition really doesn't want that as a result. So that can be difficult in those cases. That can be tough, and you have to balance that also with, you know, the fact that, hey, this just, you know, it might not initially anyways be in the cards. Later on, if that comes up, then great, but you can't always necessarily expect that if the opposition really is aware of and really is going to do anything not to let that happen as well.
We have another question, and I think I'm going to suggest this person keep an eye on the archived webinars, because this is another topic, but I still would love to hear what you have to say on it, Pat. But we do have a webinar related to the achievement of consistent draw weight. Do you have any tips on achieving consistent draw weight?
Oh, so that's a good one. I mean, there's weight control drills that you can do. You know, obviously as far as practice goes, but you know, kind of a step back from that, because that you can look up. I mean, there's lots of different kind of weight control drills. You can use speed traps to your advantage, and things along those lines. Little games you can play in practice that kind of help practice that, in a sense, train that. I would also argue that, you know, teaching the kids how to, in a sense, match rocks is a really good method drill of practicing that as well. So kind of put that on your radar as far, because that's an invaluable skill, but also may kill two birds with one stone in a sense that they get that practice of feel and draw weight and feedback and putting what they feel, and seeing if that's actually really what's happening as far as at the other end or not, and getting good and confident at doing that. So those are great ones. But a step back from all that, I think, draw weight comes from, for me, it starts right from the setup in the hack and having a good kind of routine, having a good pre-shot routine, being kind of diligent in reproducing that, but also being kind of not methodical in a sense that you're slow, but methodical in a sense that you do the same thing over and over in the hack when you start moving as well. So through your, from the setup through your drive phase, just, having that broken up enough that your body, your brain and your body kind of feels that, has input and control and can control that stuff, right? So many players are just young players. You see young players that just kind of sit down and then just things start herky-jerky moving and away they go, right? And I think training them of the importance of how reproducible and how and important it is for that stuff to be done the same all the time is, for me, that's the start of the foundation of draw weight. I think I would put so much value and importance into that. I think that also helps just technically as well. And coming full circle with that, I think the better you are technically, the better the draw weight is as well. So I think that stuff all goes hand in hand, but working on technical, when they have a clear kind of, ability and notion, but also a thought in mind of how they're approaching or how they're trying to hit the broom across the sheet of ice, with different turns, different spots in the ice and what have you. Then, when you have that fleeting thought in mind, and then you can just think about the speed, and then you're diligent with your routine, and it's methodical and it's broken up into its steps. Doesn't have to be slow, but methodical in the sense that you're doing it the same always. To me, that's the foundation of it. And then from there, then you can work on, the drills, the input of what the thrower thinks to what actually is happening, with the rock, with the result. Then you can start doing all that fun stuff to better them, I guess, with respect to the feel part of things, right? So that makes sense. Like, is that's maybe different than what you were looking for, but I think that's really important. I would say that's a massively important point with respect to that.
Great. Well, we're almost at an hour and a half. So last opportunity for any questions, anything to add? Pat, do you think you've covered most of what came into you?
Yeah, there's probably a couple always that are left out, but I think I got the majority of stuff, I think, yeah.
So you're open still to people contacting you via email with any remaining questions or anything that they may process and want to talk to you about?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, no, I quite enjoy, when I get an email or something, and absolutely, if anything comes to mind, anything, right? So if it's to do with some of the stuff we talked about, if there's something else, if you're wondering about, what should I say between an end to our team, or, how does that look, or, man, I don't know how to manage these timeouts and this and that and the other and whatever. Yeah, all sorts of stuff. We're kind of working through, in Saskatchewan, we're working through all sorts of stuff. And so anyways, yeah, no, by all means, totally open. Don't hesitate to fire anything my way. And if I don't know or am unsure, I can certainly try and try and track down somebody that does know for you for sure. But yeah, by all means, happy to help in any way possible for sure.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you everybody that who participated this evening. Your questions were great. Left us all with food for thought, so that's awesome. The recording will be available soon. It'll get out to everybody this weekend for sure. And Pat, thank you so much for taking time out of your evening to work with us once again. It's very appreciated.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. And yeah, just wish you all the best of seasons and hope to come say hi if you see me around. We'll be around the different events. But yeah, just best of luck and enjoy.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, thank you.